with Life on the Edge. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Nice to see you here. Nice to know that you are there. So, with permission, I have a little family story from recent history to share. My daughter is in the IB program, the International Baccalaureate program, which has decided that despite the large amounts of academic work, that the students also have additional activities they need to do outside the classroom and the normal homework cycle. So one in particular that her friends decided to work on collaboratively to fulfill one of the very many other requirements was they were going to plant a garden. Simple, right? Yes, none of them are gardeners. So they go into our backyard. We had the space that was volunteered for us, and they pull up a few strips of bare dirt, they lay down a little topsoil, they plant a few seeds, they make beautiful signs to mark where they are, although they can't quite remember which seeds went where. So the signs and the seeds are not exactly matching one another. They dust off their hands, and they're done. Sorry, I should point out, they took pictures of the project because, of course, that way that was the way you documented it to prove that you had actually done what you had done. I will definitely say that none of the other students ever came to the house again to check on the progress of the garden. So if anything grows in the garden, do they get credit for that? The school has already given them credit, don't worry, there was a make-work project to begin with. But should we actually give them any credit from any of the bounty from the garden? Or any of the vegetables, beyond the credit? Feels a little, okay, fine, they were there, they technically sort of helped, although I will say quite proudly, it was my daughter who was using the shovel, it was my daughter who was actually in the dirt, it was the others who were preparing things. So I would definitely say that my daughter did the lion's share of the actual physical labor. However, with the COVID changes, they decided that the best way for the IB students to shelter in place at home was to give them more work than usual, since they weren't holding classes on a regular basis. So that meant that my daughter's own efforts in maintaining the garden quickly plummeted. So the garden is now a beautiful melange of plants that she planted and weeds that God planted. She's actually come to say that she likes some of the weeds better than the things she planted. There's a few little tomato plants that are still struggling to maybe produce something. What's that? If we get anything out of this garden at all that ever makes it onto a plate, it will be a miracle. It will be a miracle. It's a great learning experience, probably not the one that they intended when they assigned it, but it's a great learning experience. But say, for example, that through some miracle, we get a nice, beautiful red tomato from this patch of foliage. Just imagine. And we put that on the plate. Who gets the credit for the tomato? And who grew that? All right. So ultimately, I think in this case, we're going to have to say God grew the tomato. Right? Because it was almost despite our efforts that this thing actually grew. The only contribution that was truly made was putting a seed in the ground almost by accident that eventually was able to take root and grow and create something. Like I said, I'm not holding out hope on these plants, but just in case something does happen to grow there, God gets credit for it. But let's imagine instead that not just my daughter, but an actual farmer is out working the field, waking up at the crack of dawn, working until exhausted at night, there behind a plow or in a tractor in the modern world, day in, day out, tending to the plants, fertilizing the plants, weeding out the things that shouldn't be there, taking care of the bugs that shouldn't be there. And then finally the harvest comes in, which, if you were living in an agricultural society, would be beginning in intensity right around now, when you would be harvesting the summer crops. And then you sit back and you see the piles of grain, the bushels of fruit, everything that's being pickled and jarred and saved for the coming winter, who gets the credit? The farmer, right? And the Torah says, you fool. You arrogant fool. But that is exactly the trap that you are likely to fall into. That you are going to come into this land, says God. You're going to come in, and I am going to give you the ability to own the land, to work the land, and grow from the land, and then you will look at what you have done and said, my own power did this. You will think you are a self-made man or a self-made nation. You will think that your destiny was entirely your doing, and you will forget God. Because the miracle of what a farmer grows is no less God's responsibility than the miracle of what might grow in that back patch of weeds in my yard. It may look like the farmer is more involved, and certainly the farmer is. All credit to where credit should go. But ultimately, did the farmer actually do all the work that made those plants grow? Did he push the nutrients in through their roots? Did he provide all that was needed of sunlight? Did he provide all that was needed for the water? Did he create the basic building blocks of life that allowed these things to begin their growth process in their entirety? And it is still a wonder to me every time I see a plant push up from the ground, a weed or not, to imagine how this tiny thing contains such potential within it to be able to give life to itself and everything around it. And the Torah warns us that this is the seed of arrogance, to imagine that we did it ourselves. Do you think you built those roads upon which your produce traveled? Do you think you created the pipes in which the water that you used traveled? Do you think you created the electricity that you used to drive your tools, your machines, and other apparatus? Did you make all of that? Even if we didn't thank God, we would have to thank our society for all of our accomplishments, no matter how self-reliant or self-starting and entrepreneurial we think we are. Go one step further to understand completely what the Torah is trying to tell us. Imagine somebody who has decided, you know what, this whole COVID thing, it's put me off humanity. I've just gone right off other humans. I don't want to have 6-foot distance. I want to have 60 miles distance. So they take everything that they own and they drop it on the side of the road and walk naked into the forest. Just start naked into the woods, because they don't even want to have a shred of cloth that came from other humans. And they go into the forest, they weave from the natural fibers their own clothing, they take rocks and begin to build a shelter, to make fire. They eventually plant after they've gathered seeds and berries, they hunt and they eat whatever they can catch or grow, and they live alone in isolation. And someone stumbles upon them 10 years down the way and says, you know, actually things are a lot better now. It's kind of silly being out here in the woods. Does that person get credit for what they have made on their own, there, isolated, hiding in the woods, dressed in clothes that they wove for themselves, eating food they caught for themselves, living in a house they built for themselves? Do they get credit? No. Did they make the sun? Did they make the soil? Did they make the animals? Yes, they get credit for the effort they put in to guide the power of this world, to guide the energy that God has put into this world. But we must always remember that we are the guide of what God has created. We are not the creator. That we are the driver of the bus, but we are not its engine. And we have choices of how we will use the power that God has placed into this universe that is at our disposal. But ultimately, that power is not ours, and it should humble us continuously that we have been given such an awesome responsibility to hold a world in our hands and decide its future and decide its fate without the ability to ever duplicate what has been made for us. We have been given a one-of-a-kind gift that we cannot replicate. We cannot make a sun. We cannot make the ocean. We cannot make life from nothing. But we can guide it, and we can steer it in a certain way, and we can steer it in other ways. The Torah calls on us in this Torah portion to recognize this humbling aspect of our existence and to fight against the arrogance in which we ignore God's massive contribution. For 99% of all human achievements is due to God. 0.9% is due to those who have come before us and those who surround us. And 0.1%, that's each of us. Each of us are able to add that little bit to our life, standing on the shoulders of those who have given us the knowledge of how to make a house, of how to make clothing, of how to heal wounds, of what foods we could eat, of how to farm, how to have a tractor, how to have a society where we don't all need to be scraping in the dirt in order to live. We stand on their shoulders as well. And then we say, I can see a little further now. Just a little further. I think we should head over there. But doing so in a way that preserves all that is there beneath us. Not turning our back on our history, not turning back on our society, not turning our back on God. Because if we deny those things, if we think we can truly be self-reliant, independent, self-made human beings, then we are delusional. And if we wish to embrace that in its fullness, we will be bestial. For only an animal is truly of itself, self-contained, because it has no awareness of its origin, no awareness of its presence, and no awareness of its destiny. And only an animal is dumb enough to think that makes it a master of its world. We are humble servants of God, and we are humble servants of our past, and we are humble servants of one another. But in that humility, we have potential that is almost unlimited, as long as we don't get ahead of ourselves. Shabbat Shalom.